This album will celebrate its 10th anniversary next month. God, I'm old. But An Awesome Wave is a very important album to me. Without it, Middle 8 might not even exist. You see, back in 2012, I was listening to the XX, Fantagram, Young the Giant, pretty straightforward indie pop stuff in retrospect. But then walked in this little track called Breezeblocks by a band called Triangle. I can't recall exactly how this track entered my life, but it spurred me on to listening to the rest of Alt J's debut. And I knew nothing about the band, but after listening to it, all I kept thinking was, this is significantly different. When I buy records, I want to be able to listen to them from front to back on a turntable. I love full album experiences. And one of the ways that an artist can fulfill that is by having consistently good tracks across the whole project. And An Awesome Wave has some incredible single power. Nearly half of its track list were released as singles in support of the record, and some of the tracks that weren't singles would go on to be more popular than the singles themselves. Other tracks include the opener titled Intro, which reminded me of the XX and M83 who did something similar around that time, but it told me that Alt J were presenting me with a whole piece of art. The album was also divided by interludes labeled with these floral hearts, which to me wasn't something I saw that often. Sure, every album technically has introductory tracks, and plenty of others have tracks that act as interludes. It was just odd to see them so obviously pointed out. Alt J clearly wanted us to listen and experience this whole thing, and finding out that there was a hidden track after 5 minutes of silence because I forgot to turn off the CD was like finding money in an old jacket that I haven't worn all year. It was cool. Alt J's sound is kind of tough to describe, because at times they sound very folk with their acoustic guitars and intimate delivery. Yes, like Johnny Flynn said, the breath I've taken and the one I must to go on. But at others, it's almost trip-hop with their clicky percussion and heavy walls of synths. Just a subtle thing that I never noticed before, but you'll find no cymbals on the drums throughout the entire record. Because when Tom Sonny Green, their drummer, was initially practicing and writing these songs, he was doing it on pots and pans. An Awesome Wave would become the first album I would truly dissect and analyze. It sent me down the rabbit hole of looking for what might have inspired it, more music that sounded like it, and ultimately what these songs were even about. Because their lead singer, Joe Newman, sings in a very warbly, nasally whine. I feel like you so many times this week. I love it in the grand scheme of things. It's definitely an instrument in itself, but you can never fully make out a track's lyrics, which is a shame, because not many people are going to uncover these interesting little love songs that Alt J have put together. Tessellate is about intimacy, comparing love to a battlefield and alluding to the Mexican standoff in The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. 3 guns and one goes off. One's empty, one's not quick enough. Matilda is a direct ode to the climax of the film Leon. But you ain't been in your hand, so you understand who's more. Fitz Pleasure is based on the rape scene from a novel called Last Exit to Brooklyn. In your snatch, Fitz Pleasure, a boom, pleasure. Can you tell that the band's members were liberal arts majors yet? Blood Flood features the album's title in its lyrics, which itself is a line from Bret Easton Ellis's novel American Psycho. When An Awesome Wave released, I had no clue how the rest of the world was reacting to this record. I'd only find out later that the reception was pretty positive and that people were comparing them to Radiohead, which I'd never really understood, because back in 2012 I loved Alt J, but I didn't really care much for Radiohead. At least then. And also, Radiohead sound different on every single album, so I feel like comparing Alt J to Radiohead was just kind of an easy out. So Alt J would end up winning the Mercury Prize, given to the best album in the UK every year. They'd embark on pretty much a world tour at that point, but then a couple of months before their sophomore release, their guitarist/bassist and silent leader Will Sainsbury would leave the band. He just thought the whole industry and the touring lifestyle was kind of bullshit. And I don't blame him. The touring cycle is something a lot of musicians seem to dread, but Alt J would press on and release This Is All Yours later that year. There's an intro track, an interlude with Garden of England, and even another hidden track to be found at the end of the album. Their debut is such a unique and fresh listening experience that just couldn't be replicated. But This Is All Yours is still pretty great. It could be a tad shorter. I don't think the interlude is needed here, and the Nara series of tracks, as beautiful as they are, I think would have served better as a separate EP. They just kind of slow down the opening pace of the record. But aside from that, This Is All Yours brings back the group's folktronica sound for a collection of more subdued and tender tracks. Following another tour, the band would take some time off. The group's drummer would end up releasing an ambient album. And soon Alt J would reconvene for their third record, Relaxer. From here onward, Alt J's records would be fairly polarizing. But I think Relaxer is a little underrated. If it weren't for their sleepy cover of House of the Rising Sun and the over-the-top Hit Me Like That snare, I think people would appreciate it a little bit more. But since it's only 8 tracks long, that's like discounting a quarter of the track list. But songs like 3WW, In Cold Blood, Dead Crush, and Adeline are some amazing additions to their catalog. They just come across as more of a collection of tracks than like a cohesive project this time around. Either way, these tracks failed to reach the mainstream audience that their first 2 records pleased. And one could only hope that this was some sort of fluke. But then we got The Dream earlier this year.
Give me the groove, straight into my hard drive.
I would think that after nearly a 5-year wait between records and the changing musical landscape, Alt J would return with something a bit more exciting than Relaxer. The Dream is a consistent record, just not in the way you'd hope. It's consistently uneventful. Most of these tracks on their own are okay, but together they start to drag, especially towards the latter half of the album. Of course, there are some exceptions, like the opening track Bane, the more spunky Hard Drive Gold, and the fairly interesting Philadelphia. There's a lot of fun ideas on this record, some great songwriting, and the first 8 tracks are actually really enjoyable. Just none of them really evolve into anything too memorable. Their knack for creating whole pieces of art just seems absent here. And that's what I used to love most about them, was their ability to create these unique, catchy, and cohesive sets of tracks that ebbed and flowed together across an entire record. Alt J's journey has certainly been a puzzling one. Back in 2012, I think a lot of people saw them heading towards being one of the biggest indie bands of the decade. And they just kind of underwhelmed at every single turn after an awesome wave, never really living up to the expectations that their debut set. They were hailed by some as the new Radiohead, precisely because they were reminding people of a legendary band who were making music with a singular vision that was undefinable. Whether you agree with the comparisons or not, I think it's fair to say that Alt J's An Awesome Wave got us all excited for something significantly different. But don't take my word for it. Like, subscribe, and buy me a coffee if you please.
I remember being at university when An Awesome Wave came out and just being blown away by this incredible, unique sound that Alt J had. It was something one of a kind when it came out.
All 4 albums, in my opinion, are so perfectly unique. You can focus on the lyrics and fall in love with those if you want, which honestly at times they are kind of hard to follow.
Take